Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of whatever this is. Uh, and today I'm actually really excited because I've got a really cool guest, Jake Lodwick. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you,
Um,
Mark.
uh, the reason, when you get introduced these, I find out who we're probably going to be speaking with. I get this superficial intro, and it's like I go, "Who's this guy?" And they go, "Oh, he's the founder of Vimeo." And I go, that's pretty cool. But then you begin doing a little bit of research into who the people are, and you go, God, that's just a teeny little
Mm,
piece of what Jake has done. And more importantly, as I was looking into it, I kind of realized that Jake and I had so many similarities and so many differences in our respective careers that it made me really interesting to do the old compare and contrast.
yes.
Before I kick it off the actual interview, let me tell everybody who's joining us this morning slash afternoon slash evening, wherever in the world you are, that this is a Q&A. And so since I'm the big cheese here, I get to ask the questions for the first 30 or so minutes, but then it'll be opened up to you and the audience's questions. So if you have a question for Jake, or maybe for me, but I'd rather we stick to Jake, pop them in the comments. Our producer will be moderating the comments. We'll pick out some great questions. And right about the 30, 40-minute mark, we'll open it up to you folks getting your questions answered. So please pop them into the comments. But anyway, welcome, Jake. I'm so glad to have you with us.
Thanks, Mark. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be really cool. So, I mentioned at the very beginning of the intro, though, co-founder of, or
Hmm.
founder of Vimeo. But as I was digging in, I go, first of all, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that was perhaps even more formative in my life, which was that you were a co-founder of College Humor, the media site, I will call it, way back. What was that in 2000? And
It was
you
right
were
at the
they began 1999. You were recruited in 2001. Recruited in 2001.
2000.
So if you guys aren't familiar with College Humor, because now it's gone, but it lives on in other incarnations. But that was one of the very, very, very first sites, which was basically doing memes and then evolving to doing videos and doing image sharing and basically sharing all the shit that made the co-founders laugh. And since the co-founders were all in college at the time, thus the name College Humor, it was pretty juvenile, which of
Mhm.
course made it really amusing, at least to someone like myself. So I guess my first question is, Jake, this was back in 1999,
The
2000,
1900s.
yeah, the 1900s. But more importantly, you got recruited when the company was 2 years old. Uh, is that
It,
right?
so it was actually earlier than that. Let's see. So the founders, Josh Abramson and Ricky Van Veen, um, went to middle school together,
Oh my God.
uh, and so they were thick as thieves back in. I mean, I didn't know them then, but throughout the 90s they were good friends, they were hustlers, they were creative. And so I wasn't there when they were initially talking about making a meme site, not that it was referred to as a meme site at the time, but making a site for all the stuff that floats around through email forwards and on these college networks, people would IM stuff. And so you would end up seeing like a funny picture here or there, but there wasn't a place where you could see them. So I don't know if it was late '99, early 2000, but they got a site up. I think maybe Josh initially put it up on literally GeoCities, and then which for anyone who doesn't know, GeoCities was at the time a great way to get a web page up without having to set up a server. So you could go to GeoCities, register an account, put up some HTML, and suddenly you had a website. The problem was you couldn't really do that much other than get a static web page up.
It
Um,
was user interface, it was the kind of user interface you'd expect for 1999, 2000, which is pretty black or reverse white type on black. It'd be awful.
yeah, it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was like typographically or visually something that you would want to show off, but it was very much appropriate for what the product was. I mean, it's literally teenagers making a zine, but on the internet. And so it was pretty rough. Um, and it worked, and it immediately started getting traction after Josh had the genius marketing idea to print out some of the memes and go around to the boys' rooms at his dorm and tape the memes inside the stalls. So people go in the bathroom. There was no stall advertisements to compete with, so you're just sitting there, and there's an ad for the website, and then so of course you go back to your computer and go, holy shit, there's a lot more of these memes, and then you would send it to someone. So the memes could go viral, as memes like to do, and in the process, College Humor, as the sort of parent body itself, became viral. So before I was recruited, it was already viral, already had found product market fit.
Wow.
But it was actually April 2000. So just, I believe, a couple months after it had launched, I came along. So Josh had set it up as a GeoCities. Then Ricky was a little more tech savvy, and he got I think Ricky got the site up. And then I already had some experience doing web development, and was a bit of a programmer and wanted to get better at it. And so that's when I got recruited to help scale it, basically, and also develop the editorial and
So
stuff
I got a
like
couple questions about that.
that.
So here you are. First of all, you're in college, right? Or you're just out of college? What are you, about 21 something?
I'm a freshman college student in my dorm.
Okay. And I assume you weren't, did you quit did you drop out of college? You didn't drop out of college to do this though, right?
No, we stayed in school, and actually that helped us keep the costs low. There was almost no overhead at the company.
But so the question I really have is
Mm.
you even made it more dramatic, which is these are two people who, thick as thieves, known each other since they were 11 or so, and all of a sudden you're this new guy on the team. What
Mhm.
did that feel like? Or was it the kind of thing when you're that age you don't even recognize that you're kind of a third wheel in a way?
Well, there's that. I never recognize I'm a third wheel, but um, so there's a very interesting coincidence, which is that they were from the same hometown as me, but we didn't
Oh,
know each other. So even though my house was just over the property line to their high school, I didn't know them because I went to a private school that was in the city. So we were from the same hometown. Josh was in the same neighborhood as my grandparents. Baltimore's a very small town.
yeah, yeah,
And so we were kind of from the same batch. I
right.
think that's an Indian term. We were from the same little world, but we didn't know each other, but we had friends in common. And actually, a friend of mine from high school who was in college with Josh uh, told Josh about my website that was already up. And then that's how they approached me, and I started working with them.
Okay, so
It's very complicated.
no, it's okay because the thing is, listen, when people hear uh, podcasts and interviews with people who founded companies, it ends up being, where'd the idea come from? And I don't care about that stuff. I love this little weird stuff about how all of a sudden people end up in these companies and all of a sudden how they navigate this. And the other thing you mentioned that you joined right around April 2000,
Mm-hmm.
which you may not remember this or recognize this, but April 2000 is a very important date in internet history because that's the dot-com crash. That is the month where all of a sudden the value of every single .com in the world drops by 95%. That's the month when all the funding dries up. That's when, as Warren Buffett would put it, that's when the tide goes out and you can tell who's swimming naked. Uh, which is, but it sounds like you guys may not even have felt that because of the fact that you had no burn, that you were basically doing this for nothing.
Yeah. So, gosh. So I was somewhat insulated from the finance. Josh was a real finance. He was literally, I think, an accounting or finance major in college. Um, and so I was always kind of one degree removed from the funding, but I was aware that we didn't have any except through advertising. And there was a company called the Immortal Blah Blah Network. There was some company called Blah Blah. I'm guessing that it was a bunch of people who knew how to raise money, and they were going to a meeting, and they were like, "Oh, what do we call the company? Oh, just call it Blah Blah. They'll still give us money." So Blah Blah had all this money from other highly funded startups, which even if the crash occurred, the money was still in the
Yeah.
companies. And so Blah Blah was like a broker between all these giant internet companies that weren't businesses. They're just bank accounts with money. And I don't want to denigrate anybody, but there was a lot of like dumb money. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so the money from these dying internet companies that were trying to get their numbers up would flow into Blah Blah. And then Blah Blah would have their ads on our site, which I think the whole premise, if we get back to the idea to commercialize Josh's GeoCity site, was
Uh,
Josh's older brother, Harry, worked for advertising.com. And he said, "Hey, Josh, you wouldn't believe it. If you can just get a website up and get 1,000 people to look at it a day, you can make a profit." And so they were an entrepreneurial family. And so Josh was like, "Well, if you get 1,000 people a day to look at your site, and I have this college joke GeoCities page, and we combine those, then we have a money printer. And so when you give a money printer to college dorm teenagers, then look what you get."
Fascinating. That's incredible because it makes it everything fit together for me. Because listen, for
Mm,
me, the year 2000 was the worst possible. We had started
mm.
Netflix 4 years before, 2 years before that. We were started in
What?
April of '98. So we didn't predate you by much, but right about the same time. So we
Oh,
were
wow.
2 years old in the year
Respect.
2000.
I didn't know you guys survived. I didn't realize it was so early.
Yeah. So and the thing is, back then it was, as you know, it was the DVD by mail business. The subscription part of it had just started in September '99, and so we
Mm,
were only six
wow.
months into the subscription business, which was crushing it great. Uh, and then but subscription business is usually cash intensive,
Right.
and so because you're doing all the acquisition cost and then taking
Mm,
the revenue over time, and all of a
mm,
sudden the bottom drops out. We can't raise any
mm,
more money. It's
mm,
disaster. But
mm,
you mentioned, listen, I use the term dumb money all the time, and
mm,
gosh, the world back in the spring of 2000 was awash in it because
mm,
in March of 2000 you could say, I've got this amazing idea. It's going to be called cement.com, and people were going to sell bags of cement for $1, and we'll ship them anywhere in the world for free. And and we'll make it up in volume. And that seriously, and people would go, "Oh my God, incredible!" And they'd raise $10 million. And because the motto, and I swear to God, people would say this, they go, "If you could just if you can just have the eyeballs, if you can just get the
Eyeballs.
volume, we'll figure out how to
Mm-hmm.
monetize it later." That was this firm belief everywhere.
Mm,
And there was so
mm.
much money that all these companies all of a sudden collapsed because there was nothing underneath them, and they're all desperate, and they all have all this cash. And there you go. You were the people they spent the money on, and that was
They
such a
should have
great.
used all that cement to build a foundation.
It really, well, in some ways it saved us because in 2000 we were actually on track, um, to go. We had someone who wanted to take us public, and they were going
Mm,
to take us public on bullshit, really,
mm-hmm.
on basically being a portal, like a College Humor,
Portals.
and and that got pulled during the
Mm,
crash. And had that happened, we would have been public with no business model. And so what saved us, which was our cement, was the fact that it crashed, and we had to then figure out something that actually we could do, which we could do for less than it cost. We could do. People would pay us more than it cost us to actually do it, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. Anyway, really,
Public
really,
with no business model sounds like caught with your pants down. I can't imagine.
it's unbelievable. There's a famous company called drcoop.com. Dr. Coop was the surgeon's general back then. Famous guy.
Mm,
He's the person who
mm,
got the smoking warnings on cigarette packages.
mm,
But and he retired, and then someone
mm,
convinced him, hey, well, we've got this great domain name, drcoop.com. It's going to be a
mm.
portal for everything medical.
Portal.
And the site hadn't even gone public. And
Mm.
the site hadn't even gone out, and they went public. And of course, there's nothing there. So this, for those of you watching who are not quite as sage as or experienced as Jake and I's, it was a fucked up time. If you think it's hard now, imagine what it was like going through that transition. Anyway, Jake, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Let's jump into a couple of interesting things did happen. So you guys began to take
Yes.
off, um,
Yes.
and then I suppose someone was going, but the merch, we can sell stuff. Since you were kind of and of course what sprung from that was the t-shirt business. Um,
Yes.
and so was that you? Were you the engineer behind it? Were you the idea behind it? It sounds like you're the guy who kind of drove Busted Tees
Mm,
to happen.
no. Well, I was the engineer with everything, but I think there was a chemistry that it can't be replaced, and I've tried to do stuff totally on my own, and it went a lot better when I had a bunch of people with similar background. We were homogenous as far as we spoke the same language, had the same cultural reference points, listened to the same 99.1 WHFS, 92.3 People Station.
Yeah,
Baltimore was our almost operating system, and same age. We were all supposed. We would have been classmates had I not gone to a
yeah.
private school. And gosh, it's it's impossible. I've never been able to distinguish who was responsible for what, and it's like I feel like a lot of the great stuff that emerged later with Zach Klein, who joined and was the co-founder with Vimeo. Um, it's almost like misunderstandings between us would often, it's like Josh would ask for something and I'd build it, and then it wasn't what he wanted, but it was better than what both of us thought. And so I appreciate how you've talked about humility, or I think in when you were talking to Mark Manson, you said you appreciate people who are humble. And I found that inevitably I keep coming back to being humble, even in my most arrogant pursuits, because I don't know, like it wasn't us, it wasn't our parents, we didn't have bosses. It's like the magic happened and we were there. And then at the same time, everywhere I go, I see the consequences of work that I did, but also no one really knows who I am. And so you just sort of end up being like, well, I guess we live in an interesting universe, and society is has it's like I don't know how to explain it, but it's not the great, it's not like, oh, I was a genius and there were three other guys, and also Josh wasn't the genius and there were three other guys, and so on. It was a chemistry, and if there's one thing I would want to replace, it was that innocent camaraderie that we had, because this was, even though there was money, people trying to give us money, the whole thing we loved so much was that we didn't need investors, and we didn't have a board, and weren't chasing and making decks. We just got the site up, people paid attention to it, we got checks from advertisers, and so even though we were financially dependent on them in a way, if they stopped advertising, as happened with the various crash moments, uh, okay, well, our costs are like literally in the hundreds of dollars a month, and we have the captive attention of an entire generation.
You'll be surprised maybe this say that was a really, really articulate explanation of what that's like at the beginning.
Yes.
Because I think the whole founder myth is so wrong, so incorrect is a better word for it. So incorrect. I mean, it comes from the fact that as humans, we kind of want a simple narrative. Like we want
Mm-hmm.
to know, All right, who was it? We want to know uh,
Who was it
what,
and what's his price?
who was it? We want to know where did the idea? What's that singular moment where the idea sprang forth, fully formed, and this eureka?
Right.
And the reality is, it never, ever, ever happens that way. It happens the way exactly you described it. You have a bunch of people and they're just having fun, and they're trying, and it's like I don't know if you've seen that. There's a really awesome. There's the Beatles documentary, which came
Mm,
out, I don't know, a year and a half ago. Um, it shows them basically putting together a concert and putting together an album,
mm,
and you realize how incredibly random it was. They're just sitting there riffing, and then someone else goes, "If you tried this," and throws something in, then someone tries this, and
hmm.
then this magic comes out of that, rather than someone going off and creating it and bringing it back fully formed. And the startup is so similar, like you described. It's just
Yes.
you don't even know you're doing it. Like you
Yes.
certainly go, did you know, like in the Vimeo case, did you know when you were creating this that you'd eventually have something which had
Uh-huh.
240 million visitors? And you
Right.
go, Jesus, no, we were just fucking around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a cool. I think back so fondly when I described for myself what the favorite moments were of doing Netflix or doing Looker or doing any of the other startups I did. It
Mm,
was just what you described. It's just the fun of sitting around with a bunch of people who you really get along with and you have a good time with, and
right.
riffing on stuff. And amazingly enough, especially when stuff starts to work.
Right. And so if you have the friends, whether they're your existing friends from school or new friends that you make, but it helps if you've already been friends for a while, and then you're riffing, and then the magic comes out of that. I'd argue the hardest part of doing a startup would be maintaining that safe space, that sanctuary where the riffing can occur and where you can say something that no one is going to shoot it down because they don't think it's the next $1 billion idea,
Ah,
right?
there's some
And as
foreshadowing taking place here, and
oh,
we're gonna get to that in a minute. I know where this is going, but let's paint the fuller picture. So you have this. All of a sudden, you have this.
that was not supposed to be foreshadowing.
You know, of course,
It's so
where you're going and where I'm going with. Oh, if
okay.
only we could keep this safe space where there are worried people who don't really understand, who think they know more than we
Okay,
do.
yeah, yeah.
We'll get to that in a second, but I totally agree with you. But so all of a sudden, you have college humor starting to take off. All of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
based on that, you have this now e-commerce site, Busted
Yes.
Tees. All of a sudden, people are buying
Wait,
meat.
can we just rewind real quick? One more thing I want to
Yeah,
add.
yeah.
One
Please,
more
please,
chapter
please go
before
here.
Busted
Go ahead.
Tees. Okay, so there were two key um, like internet boom companies that played a role with college humor. So there was blah blah. Every time I say it, I laugh. The blah blah network. We got checks every month from blah blah, and I was making all this thousands of dollars in my dorm from blah blah. Anyway, blah blah blah. So later, a company that was a little more strategic showed up called Zilo, Zilo. And this was, I'll never forget Josh telling me, oh, it's the guys who created the Ultimate Fighting Championship, like the octagonal ring. I'm thinking stop sign. Uh, those guys have a company now for college students, and what they're doing, it's a little retro, but they're gonna create content on VHS tapes and send them to all the college net TV stations, and then the TV stations will play those tapes, and the college students will watch it because the content's going to be good, and all they need is some fresh blood to make them think it's coming from college students. This is kind of the cynical take on it, but obviously they had money, we had youth, and they were offering to buy us. Um, when we think about the Beatles, there was that song, what is it? You never give me your money, you just give me your funny papers.
Yeah,
And so we were kind of learning in real time that when you give 30% of your company to people who are promising to give you money, that you're now kind of working for them and always trying to get the deal right and so on. And So they owned 30%. We were getting stuff from them, and we were doing stuff for them, and it was reciprocal. Stuff was happening, but this idea that like we had to get these older guys who'd already struck it big in order for us to get more successful, like made a lot of sense at the time because we were teenagers. My job before this, I mowed lawns. I had made hundreds and hundreds of dollars mowing lawns, and now these guys who created the Ultimate Fighting Championship were gonna like eventually make us rich, and we would be comedy writers or something. And so anyway, that was starting to tank, probably because they were doing VHS in the era of digital distribution. Sorry. Josh was, no, it's just like, I don't normally talk about it. And looking back, you see the absurdity of when you have
Yeah,
all this
it's
money
crazy.
and people trying to do something with it. And then they realize they're caught with their pants down and they're still trying and trying. I would consider Josh a business genius. And he was able to get back the 30% and restore us to full ownership. And so it was after we got out of this Xylo deal that we had a little rocket ship. I mean, the 4 or so years, I mean, I wish everyone could experience what that was like. It was the dream.
It is the dream. It's so exciting, and it's this unbelievable rush. I hope all entrepreneurs get a chance to do it. I hope everyone listening to here has a chance for that. It is the best. So then this brilliant idea. Hey, right now we're putting memes on the internet. I know. We'll put these memes on a shirt. Genius. And of course, that takes off too. And then, of course, you
Yes.
go, wow, it looks like there's this ability. The bandwidth is getting better. The content, the tools are getting better. And then, of course, it leads to the next big kind of revelation, which is maybe you could take these memes and put them on video. And is that where this next phase comes from?
Yeah, well, curiously, video was part of College Humor even before I joined. Josh and Ricky were going around Baltimore. I think they had a video series called, was it called Mullet Hunting? They would drive around and try to get footage of people with mullets. And so we were like doing prank videos and stuff, but this was the early 2000s, and even though we had high speed internet in our dorms, and some colleges did at the time, a lot of people didn't have high speed internet. Video has always been expensive to produce. No matter what, video is going to be expensive. And so it was like, okay, we can put all this energy into making, not that we called it content at the time, but making these videos. Um, but also, like, we're getting like dozens and then eventually hundreds of mostly photos sent to us. And so it was really about automating all the photo stuff and building up College Humor for years on the basis of photos and some writing. While video was always happening in the background, I had my personal video channel. We all had the dream of everyone has their own MTV. You and your friends have your own channel. I mean, this is the one thing I want to like, for historical purpose. I can say historical now, it's 25 years, is that before the internet, actually before high speed internet was ubiquitous, the notion that you could broadcast yourself, that you could have your own production and distribution was like flying in the air. Like, it was unimaginably, it was a true dream. And when I say dream, it would be something you imagine, but it's not real. And you wish it was you waking up, you go, no, 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 no. But then as we were teenagers, we were like, oh, actually, why not do this? We can make video. I'd been putting, even before College Humor, I had a server in my bedroom with a dedicated high speed IP through high school. So I was already kind of doing this on a small scale. And then as the audience was catching up with high speed, um, and the costs were coming down and our budgets were going up, suddenly we could do all the video stuff. And around then is where Vimeo started to appear. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and lo and behold, that one worked too. So before I jump into this next little phase, I just want to let everyone in the audience know, if you do have if you're sitting there going, "Oh, I'm dying to ask Jake a question," or me, you can. And the way to do it is just to pop that question into the comments. And probably about 5 or 10 minutes from now, we'll go through that list and find some good ones and shoot them out to Jake and or me. Uh, but I'm skimming over the formation part of Vimeo
Sure.
because it's pretty cool, but this is the good part. So all of a sudden now you've got this company which has three rocket ships or nascent rocket ships, let's call it. And you have College Humor, you have Busted Tees, you got Vimeo, and all of a sudden you have a suitor coming to
Hmm.
who wants to buy the company.
Hmm.
I assume you remember the discussions the four of you must have had about this. What was that like?
Yeah. Gosh, it's hard to know where to begin with that. I think the most salient point on this was that, when we got to New York, we never know where to begin with these things, but I'll say 20 years ago this week, we moved to New York. We had been living in San Diego where the weather was nice and so on, right out of college. And then as the advertising business was growing and we were sort of reaching the limits of the Silicon Valley, so the San Diego tech scene, it was just us in our house. Um, and we realized it made a lot of sense to move to New York, even though the weather wasn't as nice. All the advertising money was there, and Josh had a number in his head. He was playing the game of he had a certain amount of money he wanted to make, and that is probably why I stayed focused on it. We're trying to make money, and New York was the next place to do it because that's where the ad budgets were. So presciently, we moved to New York 20 years ago this week. I want to go back. I want to fly to New York just to have a drink with them. Um, Unbelievable adventures. So anyway, we get to New York and immediately, um, you know, everyone wants to meet us. Everyone wants to do deals with us. And I remember Josh and Ricky had a meeting with Barry Diller, and
Literally
he,
with Barry Diller, with Barry the person Diller, right?
yes,
Not with not
as
with him,
opposed
not
to,
with IAC or whatever it was called,
oh,
but him in person.
I wasn't there, so I'm not sure. It might have been with IAC,
Probably
but
him. Anyway, go
the,
ahead.
the, I mean, he was there. I don't know if other
Yeah,
people were there or if it was
right.
where it was, but I remember Josh. Barry said, "Don't sell your company." Barry's advice was just don't sell it, and it was like the best possible advice. But a year later, Barry IAC was getting back into content. Barry, I mean, I don't know where to begin. He was before the internet. He's there's a book about him called The King of Media. It's like he produced The Simpsons, like he ran Paramount in his 20s, like it's like kind of incomprehensible what level he was on. But at the same time, we were like, oh well, we're like the internet hotshots, like who has time for history or the old world? But Barry's intelligence, which is overlooked in this context, is that he was a super successful mogul prior to the internet. And then as the internet was coming out, he said the internet's the next big thing. And then he rode the wave and drove a lot of internet stuff. And to this day is like a very significant internet person, but kind of behind the scenes because he's not like the CEO of one of the IAC subsidiaries, but he's a smart guy. And he told us not to sell. But then a year later, strategically, IAC needed a content company for the same reason. Like how a room full of adults with $1 billion cannot create something that will authentically resonate with teenagers, in my opinion. And even though we were no longer teenagers, we still had College Humor. And even though College Humor was also not just always for teenagers, it still had that authentic, youthful energy. And so IAC wanted to own it in their portfolio. And we had all these meetings with IAC, and they were very smart and they recognized Vimeo was very valuable before anyone else did. So it's kind of this weird love hate thing for me where on one hand I would have liked to make money from Vimeo, but on the other hand no one else believed me, and the only freaking person who understood its value was Barry Diller.
Yeah, it's first of all, we could spend so much time talking about Barry Diller. He's a fascinating guy. I mean, he literally started in the mailroom at William Morris, but
Yes.
then he goes on. He runs Paramount. He runs Fox. He runs, Home Shopping Network is his idea. List of TV shows, The Simpsons, as long as your arms. Anyway, but he's an amazing, amazingly smart guy. But there's a moment in time there because this is right around the birth of YouTube, or the not the birth, but the realization there's something there. This is right around when Mark Cuban sells broadcast.com for
Mm-hmm.
$5.7 billion to
Mm-hmm.
Yahoo. This is the, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, people are
Mm-hmm.
going to be sending video over the internet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we got to get in on this. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the reason I was curious about how you guys thought about it internally is an acquisition is a, I was going to say dramatic moment. That's an understatement. Everything changes. Um, yeah, economically, it could be great for the people who are founders. They can get screwed too. Uh, but certainly back
Mm-hmm.
to the foreshadowing we were talking about, all of a sudden this thing, which is 100% yours, all of a sudden is very, very much less than 100% yours. And in fact, you even said something I read somewhere or other,
Uh-oh.
which is it's going to be one of your most famous quotes, like selling your business is an admission of failure.
Mm.
Uh, so in retrospect, what was that like? All of a sudden, you go out for drinks, go, oh my God, we now are millionaires.
Right.
But the next day you come into work and there's some guy in a suit who's going, okay, there's going to be some changes, or saying nothing's going to change, but maybe I have some
Yeah.
suggestions for you.
Yeah. Right. Well, everything was gradual there. And, we sold 51% of the company. So we might as well have sold 100. We gave up control. We did it consciously. I'll never forget the actual sale because there was like months and months of drama. I was very focused on engineering. I'm a coder and I'm a
Yep.
product person, so I don't care. I didn't care. I kind of still don't care what the hell is going on the business side, unless it involves transactions with the customer. But as far as funding, financing, I didn't even know what a cap table was until like 5 years ago, literally. So I'll never forget with the sale. It's like, okay, months and months of build up talking about this sale. Josh and Rick, you're negotiating it. We have lawyers, might have still been our like lawyer from Baltimore. And so finally they're ready to sell. And so we go to this, um, fancy lawyer office building in Manhattan, like Park Avenue, perhaps Madison Avenue, who knows? And so it's the four of us who clearly don't belong in a law firm unless we're in handcuffs. And I had this haircut. I can't remember if my girlfriend at the time had given it to me while we were on mushrooms or if I got run over by a lawnmower. But it was a joke haircut. It was like a haircut. It was a fuck you haircut, and it had like a single rat tail. I mean, it was like this guy doesn't give a fuck haircut. And we're in the elevator and we're like going up to like make $30 million today. And as we're going up, we were kind of just like laughing and have this energy. And then like before our floor, the door opens and one of these like lawyers who was in there, he gets out of that floor. And then right before the door closes, he goes, "Get a haircut." And the door's closed. And we just exploded laughing. We're like, just like, you have no idea who, like, it's just funny. It's the kind of thing you don't have to explain. We had that rapport and camaraderie. And so then we went into the room and there was like 8 copies of phone books that were actually, it wasn't a phone book. It was a stack of contracts and each contract was several hundred pages. We spent 45 minutes just going through signing. So we knew what we were doing. We were selling our company for money. And I didn't get the memo that when you do that, you have a boss now. And so I had this weird thing where like I'd read about Barry and I knew who he was and I had respect and wanted to like do good stuff at ISC, but I didn't understand that it's not just hanging out with this smart older guy all day. There's a very large corporate infrastructure here that now we have to somehow find a way into. And you know, I mean, I was still involved in College Humor at that time, but for me, Vimeo was life or death. There's no way to express how important, how personal, how determined I was, and I shared that with Barry, and he encouraged it. And it was like the one-on-one with him was, I mean, it was really a very fortunate, formative experience for me. But I could not get with the program of the corporation. not rip anyone to shreds right now. One of the uh, actually a couple of the people who were layered, but the oldest, there was a nincompoop who was now my boss. And so even though I respected Barry, he had
Yeah.
hired someone who didn't understand the internet and was really had this kind of, we didn't get along. And so before we knew it, I took a hit of ecstasy, had a one-on-one with Barry so that I'd be forthcoming. And I told him that I'm not, you got to get rid of this guy. Like, just look at me like this. He doesn't work. He needs to be removed. And if I can report directly to you, then Vimeo can be everything. And he basically said, like, you've just made a pretty critical negotiation error. You're not supposed to give an ultimatum to somebody because, you backed me into a corner. And I was like, you're right. And then I was fired after a couple of weeks, for one reason or another, probably that. And yeah, so don't back Barry into a corner. Don't back someone who works for you in a corner. Don't back people into corners. Don't give people ultimatums. And if I had just been patient, then the person I didn't like he was gone anyway. He was gone like yeah, he was gone right after me. And so it was like all this fighting was over nothing, and but whatever.
Oh
And
God,
then
we could talk. We could talk for
Vimeo
2 hours
grew
about
much
this.
bigger after I was gone.
We could talk this
Yeah.
for 2 hours because there's just in that one little story, there's so much to unpack. Because on one hand, that's what I call the asshole theorem, which is that if you think someone's an asshole, probably everyone else does too.
Right.
So if you're looking at this boss and going, "Oh my God, this guy's clueless. Why doesn't anyone
Yeah.
see that? Why are they making me work for this guy?" Well, everyone else does see it, and eventually they'll write it. So that's correct. On the other hand, it would never have worked anyway. Once you have that freedom of riding the rocket ship, really hard to
Yeah.
hang
Oh,
in
come back
there.
down to earth.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, so God, I have so many questions, but unfortunately, they'll kill me if I don't give some
Yes.
space
Let's do it.
to some folks who've been
Well, you're
watching.
sticking around for the.
Oh, I'm sticking for the Q&A for sure.
All
I'm
right.
not going to miss
Let's
this.
keep hanging out.
And the thing is, I can also pretend that
Mm.
the question came from the audience and actually ask one that I did. No, not really.
Ah.
But because there's so much good stuff still to
And
ask.
when do I interview you?
Exactly right.
You think I
Next
don't have
time.
questions?
Next time. All right. Anyway, Hunter, what do we got? You want to shoot something up here? Okay. So there's a classic. So in a space dominated by a powerhouse incumbent like YouTube, and YouTube is obviously huge, even for a company like Netflix. So how do you go about thinking about competition and differentiation? How does a company like Vimeo uh, ever find space in something where the incumbent's so dominated?
um, it's a big one. YouTube is a very. I am friends with one of the founders of YouTube, Javed. He was kind of pushed to the side by the other two guys, but the brains behind YouTube was Javed Karim, and there was a huge opportunity for them at the time because even though Vimeo had been around for several months, um, technologically, and financially, we were not there. And I went from being the best coder in New York, at least in media, to realizing that the game was a lot larger than that, and that there were a lot of software engineers on the West Coast who I had a lot to learn from. And so the YouTube founders were able to come into a space dominated by Vimeo and dozens of other nascent video sites, and to very quickly distinguish themselves. Not They had to pivot a little bit in the sort of early YouTube history, but what didn't pivot was the technological underpinning of the transcoding pipeline that Javed led the engineering. And so, even though their initial ideas about is this a dating site or what are people going to put up here um, didn't come through, it wasn't through copying Vimeo or copying the other sites as a product, but rather rapidly iterating on what the YouTube users were doing. So I think we can look at YouTube coming in. Not that we were powerhouses at the time, but YouTube did enter a little later and was able to build something that scaled and became so dominant that now we're asking questions 20 years later of how do you compete with it. You do not compete with YouTube. The time to compete with YouTube was literally what 2000
22 years ago, 21 years ago.
or it was so long ago. And I would argue that as soon as Java had implemented the YouTube transcoding pipeline, the war was over. Google was shitting their pants. Google had no idea what to do. Google did not have the capability of competing with them. They were running in circles trying to digitize the news and make it searchable. They had no clue what they were doing. They needed to purchase somebody. So Google's purchase of YouTube came much later than the war already being won. They toyed with them in the negotiations. Finally, got so much money they couldn't count it, and were able to leave. So, back to the question: YouTube earned its dominance through technological superiority and a faster iteration loop with the customers. Vimeo was very focused on the two artist founders' desires to make a very high quality video sharing platform, which YouTube was never able to emulate because it was too numbers driven and there were no filmmakers there from the beginning. Even though Chad and Steve posed like this, that's all they were. Is they were posers. I hate to say it, but they were posing and consciously going on the news saying that their story was a lie, but hey, we have to tell a marketing story anyway. So with no filmmakers at YouTube, there was no way for them to be a high quality platform for artists. Whereas I'd been an artist, I'd gone to art school. Zach went to art school, literally two artists building a platform for ourselves. And so with all this preamble, I'll say this: look within yourself and find a muse that's either you or your friends, someone you love. You have to actually care about them, not just, oh, it's my cousin. People love their family or something. It's not like that. Or my neighbor asked for this. Find someone who you care about enough that you will stick with the project long enough, even when it's hard, because uh, you want them to have your invention. You would be disappointed in yourself if you didn't give them.
In some ways, it's almost a more powerful motivation than doing it for yourself, because so many startups come, I'm solving a problem that I see every day. But doing it for someone that you love or feel strongly about has a dual motivation. And one, of course, is getting the problem right. And the second one is this moral obligation to help somebody else. It's interesting.
It's inescapable. if you have a gift, if it's cooking, if you're a financial wizard, if you're an inventor, if you're an artist, then at some point, if you're really good at it, your needs are met.
Yeah.
And then it turns into, okay, do I just become a hoarder? I mean, look at you. I'm assuming you're not a pauper. If you were, you could probably sell those books and get enough cash to buy your next meal.
Yeah.
Yet you still create companies and you still contribute.
Yeah.
So what can you contribute? I wouldn't ask how do you compete with YouTube? How do you show a billionaire who's boss? How do you replace Netflix with something that's 5% better? It's not the way to think about it. The way to think is, oh, I have a gift, I have a talent. What can I do? So YouTube, now it's a platform that we all use. I use it. Everyone uses it. I use it 50 times a day. It's like one of the great inventions and services of the world. It's unbelievable.
And
so,
bigger than Netflix.
Sure. I mean, look at Google and what they can do with that skill.
Let's try and squeeze another question here. Hunter, do you have another good one we can throw up? So Raymond asks, oops, no, he doesn't. Yeah, Raymond does ask. If you had to build a dream team to start a company, what are the 3 most important skill sets you look for? And before you jump that, I'm going to actually compound that question, because one of the things that I wanted to also throw into that same question is there's a quote. It's from one of your websites. I think it's gone, but I'm a master at digging old shit up. And basically, You were talking about two of the companies you did solo projects, Hyperbrowse and Pummel Vision. Good names.
Yes.
And the quote is, the latter taught me that no matter how much discipline and energy I mustered, I simply couldn't build a company by myself. So, in some ways, this question is about that as well. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. And I want to add, with Pummel Vision, I really tried. I had this rigorous self-management system I created. So I was my own manager. And then in that, I split myself into four work personas: the CTO, the CEO, the customer service person, and so on. And I would take shifts, and it was going really well. The problem was I was a schizophrenic hermit, and I would like get a meeting with Etsy or and with there was a Netflix was it was a new way to browse Netflix.
Did you have different hats and accents you put on when you did each of those personas and have arguments
Yes.
with them? I need those
Oh,
numbers tomorrow. Boss, no, I'm too busy. I'm working on this other thing.
I've debated whether I should burn or put in a safe deposit box the videos I was shooting at the time. Too crazy for this century. Okay, it's not a good idea. I'm glad I tried it, but it's really about other people and company. It's like, okay, you could be a musician and you do it all yourself. I record, I engineer, I rap, I make the beats, I mix it, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, really, don't we want to just be in a room jamming and someone turn on a mic and record it? Like, it's that chemistry. And I'm all about being an individual, alone time, the Randian genius and so on. But it's like there's a tree and there's a forest, and it's not a tree and it's not just part of a forest. Like, you have to be able to switch between perspectives, left brain, right brain, back and forth. And like, the company is not an individual surrounded by other individuals. There's something created in that interference pattern between those various energies. So before I even got to skill set, I would want to make sure that I had rapport and that I trusted them, because when, I bet you know this, when the money starts showing up, you see the true colors, right?
Yes.
Right? When the money starts showing up, you see who people really are, and you start to see new types of people. And if you don't have your crew, if you don't have your clique, if you don't have your boys or your girls or whoever, like, forget it. Like, you'll get dazzled and you
And so,
won't
so
remain grounded.
what would your dream team look like? What would
Well,
the
I'm gonna boot on what my current dream team would be and just make it a little more abstract. So
Sure.
the first thing I would do is say, what are your skills? And then find people who are complementary. Don't forget the observer. Okay. So, I'm building a dream team. I. Well, who's the I who's building? And if you probably don't really know your skills, you might even think what you're good at, you're actually terrible at. You might be really good at something you don't even understand is a skill. And so if you start finding people who are complementary, like a checklist, you might end up intellectually doing the right thing, but there's that test of when you're trying to hire somebody and you think, okay, if I'm working late, as I will be invariably, no matter what work life balance we aim for, we're going to be working late some days building a startup. And if it's 9 p.m. and I finally solved this problem that was threatening to take the company down, and now I can close my laptop and go home, and this person is passing me in the hall, am I happy to see them, or can I just not wait to get home? And so if you find someone who perhaps you've known them for years, or perhaps you met them recently and you trust them and you just feel it, they better be someone that you're excited to hang out with when you're done working for the day.
Well, cool. Well, listen, Jake, in the interest of time, yours and our audiences and mine, I think I'll wrap it up here. I'm bummed a little I didn't get to more questions, but that's only because I was so digging talking to you, and I hope everyone else got some.
I loved our chat, Mark. It was really great to talk to somebody. We didn't even get into all the video distribution stuff, and
I know.
I'd love to talk about that. But in part two.
Absolutely. And so I know what we should just do is we should do a part two, At the beginning, we should even warn people it's going to get a little dorky because we can talk about the whole issue of, for example, Netflix. We knew from the beginning in 1997 that eventually we'd be doing video, and it took 9 years in our case. You guys were solving that same problem. There's a whole bunch of cool stories there. I mentioned the
Yes.
e-commerce thing. All of a
Yes.
sudden, you guys go, let's start selling physical products and shipping them. And
Yes.
I'm sure there was this, oh, it's just really easy. And then guess who has to figure out that whole fucking infrastructure to actually take orders and do it securely? And
I was helping a friend get his e-commerce business set up earlier this year, and we're building. I'm like expecting to build a custom server, and we just do it all through Shopify. I'm like, what? This is like so easy. I can't believe it, and that's good. I'm not saying everyone should build e-commerce from scratch, but I think for posterity, history, whatever you want to call it, it's important to preserve what the world was like prior to that, so that people, almost like sci-fi, can understand. Oh, well, the present day we're in has similar. Find those opportunities.
even serving a web page. We 1998, which we launched this thing in April 1998. Serving a web page meant we had our own servers. We were wired in a closet in our building to take the payments. We had to code the portals to the bank. I mean, anyway, this is two guys going, oh, back in the day. But people didn't understand that. But listen, we're at a time. We've set it up beautifully for a phase 2, and I definitely want to do it. And Jake, stick around for a second after we go off the air, just so I can say thank you personally. But I will say it on the air. Thank you. This was really awesome. I hope everyone else got had as much fun with this as I did.
And thank you, Mark, and thank you to the audience for being here. And looking forward to part 2.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time on